I'm joined here by a wonderful human being named Russ Charles, joined from SFG. How are you today?
Fantastic, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, happy to have you. So today we're going to be going over some of the background nerdy engineering things of how it is to make models and how it is. Do you want to give everybody a little quick info of like you, your hobby history, where you fit in the SFG team?
Yeah, sure. For those who don't know, hi, I'm Russ Charles. I'm the lead sculptor and sculpting coordinator at SFG, which means that anything to do with miniatures on any of our projects, especially War Machine, sort of passes over my desk. My background is I've been with SFG since before it was SFG. I was tapped up by Matt and Rich to work on a little game idea they were having for something called Guild Ball. I did some miniatures for that, and the rest is history, really. I went from being the only sculptor at the company to, over time, ending up with an internal team of sculptors and working with a lot of really talented freelancers. So lots to keep me busy, and I still get to do really cool sculpting myself. So yeah, it's all pretty good. Hobby wise, I started many years ago. I was around for the original release of Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader back then. Played that for a little while, did the GW thing, and then uh, fast forward a few years, got into War Machine around about when Mark II released, and I got into painting, doing painting competitions. I went to a painting contest. I took a gold for my Giles Gold Trollblood, and one other competitor had also entered Giles Gold. He got a silver, and that was Matt Hart. And sitting chatting over painting techniques and why we thought the one miniature had come first, and just sort of generally having a breakdown and a good old nerd out about painting was the start of a friendship that's lasted all of these years. And really, War Machine is probably one of the main reasons that everything else has followed, because without that connection, I don't think I'd be where I'm sitting now. So yeah, that's my story, really.
That is awesome. Awesome to hear. It's cool that you found a painting person that just like immediately was like, "Hey, let's learn from each other."
Yeah, that's always been like Matt's jam, and I'm fully on board. Sharing ideas and sharing techniques, and sending WhatsApps at 2 in the morning with cool videos that you've seen and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know we were chatting a little bit before the show. You gave me some cool ideas for when I eventually get my Phantasm.
Such a good model. Such a good
It's
model.
such a good model. I'm obsessed with it. So is every Dusk player currently.
And rightly so. So rightly so.
A little bit of what I'm working on right now is I'm working on a Gravedigger's commission that is very video game themed. Um, and then I got some P3 paints in, and I've been working on a retro like 90s like paint style on Cynthia Roscoe.
That's very cool.
Yeah,
That is very cool.
P3 paints have been. I'm assuming. Do you use P3 paints? I'm assuming yes.
So, yes. So, as I progress my collection of brine blood trolls that I think look cool into brine blood trolls that are actually effective on the table, the sort of natural breakpoint for me was I got my P3 set through just after I finished the Lockerbash Brothers and just before I started painting Chum. So Chum was my first wholly P3 driven paint project, and since then I can't put them down. I was a huge PP user back in the day, a big P3 fan, and so it's been really nice to get back on board with them. And yeah, I'm really enjoying working with them at the moment.
Yeah, this is my first real experience with them. I think I had picked up like a cold black when I picked up my first two models, which we'll get into my history for War Machine. I picked up cold black and I think arcane blue for retribution. And that's my limit. Like I didn't know how to wet blend, I didn't know how to do any of that. So now that I'd like to think I'm a more experienced painter, but we'll see. Using them now, it is like the new ones are a dream to work with so far.
They are great. I'm super impressed with them. I had the best day months and months ago. Matt Hart, our creative director, Sherwin, who people know as one of the big War Machine lore guys these days, also an excellent painter, and myself got to go to the paint lab where the paints were being made, and we had a day painting. which is where I painted the booty. But I started painting the booty boss and then put him on a shelf for like 12 months and finished him about a week and a half ago. And yeah, it was amazing because we would be painting and we'd be like, right, I'm putting this like copper on. Oh, it's a little bit cool. We want the color to be a bit warmer. And like the guy would be like, okay, and he'd take the pot away and disappear into his lab, and he'd come back with a different shade of paint. And literally having the colors remixed and like the opacity and the viscosity changed in front of you. It was a crazy day. It was
That's
so much
insane,
fun.
actually. I didn't know that's how that
Yeah.
worked.
Nor did I until I got to go, and it was just like, what a day! What a fun day!
Yeah, I've tried out a few of the solid colors. Metallics are up next for me. Excited to mess with them more because I'm gonna teach myself wet blending finally. What are you currently painting? Since we're talking about paints.
Yeah, like I say, I've been a Trollblood player since I first encountered the game. I started playing War Machine, like I say, around about Mark II, and in that time I have been faction pure on Trollbloods all the way through, and so Brine Bloods have been the natural place where I've landed. Kithgard will follow, but at the moment I'm all about the Brine Blood life, and yeah, I did my usual thing of picking up all the sculpts that I thought looked really cool and spent countless hours painting them, and then arrived at the table and discovered that like what I had is not even remotely functional in game terms. So I'm now filling in all of the gaps that I need so that the army actually works. And then the only reason I'll be losing will be myself and not my list choice. So I've just wrapped up. Like I say, a booty boss I finished, and on the table at the moment is Gregor Boomhowler, a bosun, and a second booty boss because I am that guy. And I've got a reef troll and a deepborn next to round that out because I've got this idea for some fire quill action that needs a hefty amount of war beasts to make it work.
That is awesome. Now, are you prepping for any kind of event or anything? Is there a timeline set for yourself?
Yes, I am. Like I think many of us, I need an event. I need the motivation. I need the deadline to paint. There's a big event in the UK which I'm sure some people will have heard of because it is a pretty big one called the Welsh Masters. It takes place in September. It's held in Cardiff, and I am making like that event my big focus. A whole load of the SFG staff are going to it. It's turned out into a proper like company weekend away kind of thing, and I am not going to let the team down and turn up with anything other than my best foot forward, because realistically, a painting nomination is my only opportunity to win anything at an event. So I'm trying to make the best army I can visually and get it on the
No,
table.
you're gonna play Matt Hart at the top table for first and second, but this time instead of painting first and second, you'll take first and winning.
Yeah, and then I will ride out of the room on a golden sled pulled by unicorns because that's
Yeah.
about as realistic.
Yeah, I'm
That should be a great time. Really
It
looking
will
forward to it.
be. I am those. I've seen some good news about the Welsh Masters. It looks like it's gonna be a fantastic event. It's a little far for me,
Yeah,
but I will be excited to tune in virtually.
yeah. That's
Uh,
how I always feel about like the Nova and stuff. Not really
Speaking of
commutable.
Nova is my big event that I'm prepping for. Getting my dusk from the 40% blocked out that they were for Adepticon to the more 80 to 90% done that I want them for Nova, pending Phantasm. When it is on my desk, I will try to get that table ready for Nova as well.
I think that's a very laudable aim. I wish you wish you luck
Yeah,
in that
it's
one.
gonna depend on when it hits the site and when it can get in my mailbox. Because I will take some time off at work to finish to get it at least table ready. Very cool. Excited for you to get ready for Welsh Masters. Excited for all that.
Thank you.
Um, this can kind of now we can get into the actual questions of what we're here for today. What are
Okay.
you currently working on designing? What's on your workbench, but for 3D modeling?
Well, I mean, there's some things I can talk about in detail, and some things that I'll be a bit more kind of alluding to. So a big part of the one of the cool things that I get to do is because I'm seeing projects from one end to the other. I'm at the very end of one and the very beginning of some others. So I'm currently on the final stages of looking at most of the Kithgard range, which obviously I'm delighted about because it's trolls. And we're at the stage now where I'm basically just making last amendments. We've been doing test printing and checking with the production team, and I'm just tweaking and making sure that those models are the best they can be before they go into production. So my desk is littered with Kithgard models, many of which are almost perfect, but have like one thing that needed a change. So like I have this enormous Kithgard army on my desk, which is in its whole, it's not actually usable, but like there are some hidden gems in there that I might end up painting. But yeah, so I'm coming to the very end of that, and then that's been really good fun because I think it's a fantastic looking faction. And then I'm doing the other really cool thing that I get to do, which is when we're doing a new faction. We did this on Umbre, and we did this on Kithgard. One of the things that I do is arrange to do or do myself. We do like a benchmark set of sculpts. We might do one of the main characters, and like, you know, if there's like a male and female like infantry body type. What we do is we will sculpt out those elements, and what we're doing is we're trying to establish the baseline of what the art is meant to, how it's translating into 3D. So when a sculptor looks at a piece of concept art and he sees a particular like collection of filigree or a particular like style of armor decoration, we've got a model that's basically saying, when you see this, make it look like that, so that they can take that baseline and do all of the cool riffing off that they need to do to create the model range, but it's all going to happen from a sort of standardized core model concept. Really, really helpful for keeping the faction feel coherent and visually distinct and harmonious. And particularly with something like Kithgard, where, you know, you've got that militaristic thing going on. So the guns and the helmets and the boots and the jackets and things are all sort of standardized. Being able to give people a 3D model that's got those parts in it, almost like a library, they can either draw directly from, or they can take those bits and use them as a reference point to develop like offshoots and variants. It's proven really beneficial, and so I'm doing that at the moment for two up and coming factions that obviously I can't discuss in detail. And it's been really interesting. It's really fun because like part of doing that is a problem solving process. You know, you're looking at the concept art and you're looking at the miniatures that you want to achieve, and you're sort of working out what the journey from A to B needs to look like. And it just so happens that with this particular thing, like one of these problems is a very artistic, creative, sculptural solution, which has been loads of fun. And then the other one, to solve the problem I wanted to solve, I had to use a much more kind of technical, pipeliney, like moving from this piece of software to that piece of software, like jumping around. So it's one of the things that makes it really interesting, because I'm sort of, you know, playing in two very different halves of my brain almost at the same time to solve these two problems to get the end result that I need. So yeah, that's been loads of fun. I'm terrible for wanting to share really cool things. I say it all the time, and I'm biting my lip not being able to talk about these things in more detail. But yeah, it's one of the coolest parts of the job.
We don't want you getting in trouble.
No, but yeah, that stage of seeing like the artwork for the first time and coming up with those initial sculpts is like absolutely golden, because you're bringing the very sort of first elements of something to life in 3D, and yeah, great fun, great time. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing the very end of something and the very start of something.
That's very cool.
Very cool.
And as you were saying, you're using both halves of your brains. I'm sure that helps you as the creator, like stay energized, because you can switch between the two techniques and be like, oh, let me do this for a little bit. Let me do this for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, you know, like any kind of sort of problem solving, there's multiple ways that you can solve these things depending on like what your priorities are. Like, are you trying to solve it for scalability, repeatability, time efficiency, whatever? So I'm sure that there are different ways I could do all the things I'm doing, but that's what's part of the fun is finding the solve that you think's right for the situation. So yeah, good times.
Yeah, I mean, like, when I problem solve at work, it depends on the monster I had that day. If I had a white monster, it's gonna be the most clinical response. If I had a pink monster that day, it's gonna be a little flowery, it's gonna be a little out there, but it's gonna get the job done.
I I can respect that decision making process.
Uh, Very cool. Leading into some speaking of, like, you were talking about you're working on some other things, we're not gonna get into them, but how much further ahead are model designs than rules? Because, like, how does that process start? Like, where are you handed it, and then where do you take it from? And how far along is the process when you get it?
That's an interesting one because there's actually quite a few sort of variables and elements to that. Um, and also, like, I don't get that involved with the rule side of things. It in what they say, you don't give a monkey a gun. Like, letting me loose on rules would not be a great idea. I don't get involved with the rule side of things because I'm very, very focused on the visuals. Now, that being said, when you look at something like the plastic miniatures, HIPS models can take anywhere up to 12 to 14 months to fully cycle through from the initial sculpts being completed and going into engineering to when they're fully ready for release. Now, I know that, it's the 14 months out, you're not going to have the final settled
Oh,
and
yeah.
locked versions of the rules because there's an extensive amount of playtesting and development that's going to go on. So the initial sculpting can be quite dislocated from the final settled and locked rules.
Um, okay. When when you get the rules, is there often a time where it's like you design the model and they're like, okay, we'll design the rules for the axe you designed? Or is it very much you are given be like, hey, this guy has an axe, it's a big axe, design that?
Yeah. Wow. That can go one of two ways. I think historically it's kind of been the former, like the rules are kind of set. That said, I've got access to the like playtest versions of rules, so I've got an opportunity to inform the sculpts and so forth based on the rules that the team are developing, because if a character's main attack is like a really cool magical knife, you don't want them holding a spear, like something as fundamental as that. But like, that's not really going to happen very often because both the rules team and the miniatures team are all working from the same really solid like art brief and concept brief that was created. That So that might not, it doesn't sort of have a brief in terms of this model has reposition 3 and shoots a gun
Mm,
that has power
okay.
13, but it'll describe what that intention of that character is conceptually, is what kind of things they may be able to do on the battlefield. And so the rules team have got that same sort of like guide to where they land as we have visually. So like, we're translating concept art into a 3D sculpt, they're translating concept rules, if you like, into actual like mechanical like systems on the table. So those things are all going to kind of run in parallel. Um, but they have plenty of opportunities for touch points along the way to make sure they're staying in alignment. And then the intention should be that the two, when they finally meet, are completely sort of harmonized. And we have the opportunities to sort of check in and make those adjustments. Yeah, and sometimes the rule of cool applies, and you have a really neat idea, and you say, why don't can we do this with the model? And it's like, yes, and it might have a rules implication, but if there's a chance to do that, we'll do it because like, that's cool.
Yeah, Rule of Cool sells models too.
Damn tootin'.
Um, yeah, that's very cool. I've always been curious about like that timeline of things, like when you guys get like, hey, make this. And it's like, okay, this is where everybody else is on the line too.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because quite often, like, the nature of the miniatures process, it's like anything that's going to be physically packaged, isn't it? You've got the miniatures, you've got the box design. Like, if you work backwards and think, right, these minis have got to go in this box, that box got to have photographs on the front. So at the same time that those miniatures have been sculpted and they've got to be produced in sufficient quantities to fill the boxes, we've also got to have being able to get a physical copy of the model, we've got to have it painted, it's got to be photographed, graphic design got to do their thing. So often and by our I mean the sculpting side of things, the miniatures side of things has to be one of the earliest things that happens, because so much of that has to be locked in place so much earlier because there are so many other like physical dependencies. Whereas anything that's deployed digitally, the way rules have, I think there is more, there's more latitude in that. But at the same time, like there is a lot more potential for unforeseen second order effects if you get rules slightly wrong. So that process has to be really, really rigorous. So it's really interesting because these two things kind of run at different speeds at different times, and like the ups and downs between the two. But it all comes together in the end because it all gets coordinated really well. I'm glad that I don't have to try and keep track of all of that.
Yeah, you get to do the cool stuff and not the big upper managerial stuff.
Yeah, I'm not a numbers guy, but give me some cool miniatures to make. I am a happy man.
Awesome. That's a perfect lead into like because you don't want to perfect lead into the next question of the Iron Kingdom's aesthetic. When you begin designing an army, how do you ensure it kind of like fits into that Iron Kingdom's look and feel and vibe?
Solo that's about to come and like murder all of your models. And so I'm always thinking about making sure that hierarchy is reading as clearly as it's possible to do so. And then with the wider connection to like how do you make it feel part of the Iron Kingdoms, that's really interesting. And you could sit and have a proper round table with a whole group of people about this, because the Iron Kingdoms it's a vibe. It's one of those like when something fits, you can see it, and breaking that down into visual language and visual design is really challenging and really interesting. Lucky for us, we have both the collective artwork and written background of the setting going back decades, but we have also got access to the mind of Matt Wilson and the incredible artwork of Andreas and the other artists that he's working with. So those guys have an intuitive and deep understanding of the setting that goes back a long time, and you can draw on that. I mean, one of the things that I've done recently is look at old sort of role-playing illustrations of anything, like looking at pictures of architecture for a faction might give you shape language that then gets interpreted into the shape of their sword blades or a belt buckle, and it's looking for visual language that ties to the historical representation of that faction, and not just in terms of models, but how it's been shown in the RPG, how it's been shown in art books or posters. I mean, a really great example is Chum in the Foulblood Armada. The Deepmoor fish that he's holding is from an old Monster Necronomicon entry from years ago, and it looks identical. It's a one-to-one transfer, and that sort of deep historical reference gives Chum an instant place and time, and embediment, sort of embedding him into the setting, and that could only happen if you've got that material to draw on, and you've also got people who understand the background and are either able to recall that or do the research to go and find things. So we are proactively looking for ways to tie everything in and connect it together.
That is,
so, yeah,
that is super cool. I would have never
really
thought.
nice.
I'm saying I would have never have thought like you're taking the shape of a building and being like, oh, that's their theme. Let's put it on their belt buckle. That's such a interesting translation.
I mean, I think there's a lot of precedent for that kind of thing. We're not, it's not an unexplored concept. The great example is like Art Deco versus Art Nouveau is basically dwarves versus elves in the rings, and the so that the angular blocky language of the dwarves' armor and weapons translates into their architecture, and then the fluted designs of the elves translates into their buildings. It's that same concept, only, we don't only have to do it with dwarves and elves. We've got like 19 different design languages to keep in the air and develop, which is, from as someone who really loves like breaking down the visual language and like implied sort of themes that you can get out of shapes and designs, like that's absolutely like playtime for me. I love all of this.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. So I think that's just a very cool concept to me, as like a first time hearing how cool insight onto how that design process works and how you're adapting a universe to models and making it fit in as a whole, like across multiple different factions that all have like, they're like the different countries in the world, but they all are a part of the same world, and making them all fit together has got to be a challenging process. But that's super cool how you managed to do all that.
Yeah, and it's this is one of those it takes a village situations. You've got people feeding in from the lore, people feeding in PG, people feeding in from the visuals, and all of that stuff funnels down to create the final concept art that will get turned into the miniatures. The final model that gets sent out is like it's either the pinnacle of a very, very tall pyramid, or it's the tip of a very deep iceberg, depending on your preferred analogy. But it very much is. You're constantly building on the collaboration of so many people's input.
100%. And like the comment you said about when you are singled in on like that one idea of like how this looks on the table and building that hierarchy of the models, that's perfect when you have a team, because you can do that. The other part of the teams can cover where you're not singled in on, and then you all have your basically your targets that you're after, and then it all comes together at the end for a tabletop army.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are so many like obvious metaphors you can use for it, but it's infinite. Everyone's playing their own piece, and you just trust that your team's all going to perform together, and it's really good fun. Like, yeah. I'm not going to lie, I am living my best life at the moment, having so much fun.
That is sweet. That's good to hear. I love that. So we can get into some discussion about Old Umbre, which is the new hot topic right now.
Very exciting.
Where did the inspiration from Old Umbre come, if you know?
This is an interesting... Well, I was going to say, it's an interesting one for me, because a great deal of the concept art work was either completed or in the process of being delivered sort of as I came onto the project. So this was one where I didn't get a lot of I wasn't involved in the sort of like early creation stages of Old Umbre, but I did get plenty of opportunity to provide like feedback and amendments as we went forward. I think that although the core themes are very settled, looking through the art and looking through the briefs, I think the main inspiration was like looking at the existing lore of Kador as a nation, and its history, and also like, so you've got the in-world sort of lore and history and all of the implied facets of that, and also the real world like analog that Kador draws on. So you're drawing on sort of Slavic through to the Russian kind of folkloric myths on top of the military. Mm-hmm. So you've got all of those elements being drawn together. And I think that sort of more folkloric side of things was kind of touched upon in the past. You had Vlad, you had the Old Witch. They give you that like sort of like a peep through the keyhole into that part of the setting in the early version of the game. But I think that taking and expanding on that was like a path that gave us a faction identity that is really interesting, because it's a combination of two things, which is it's a really strong contrast with the Winter Corps, like thematically and how they play. I mean, one's a focus faction, one's a fury faction. They couldn't be more like contrasting. But at the same time, because you're drawing on that folkloric myth that's already been like referenced and hinted at in the past, you're also creating something that is a contrast but is still embedded in the established character of the setting and is the established character of what it is to be Kador as a nation.
Yeah.
So I think that's how that that's thematically where that sort of came from, was the desire to reflect on the fact that their society is not just one thing. It's not a monolith, and it's such a rich source of visuals and concepts. The sort of dark folklore side of it is really like potent, and I think that that's reflected in how strongly people have reacted to the model range. I think it's come out really well.
100%. I think a lot of people are really digging their vibe, like the concept art that they y'all releases, like that sparked a lot of people really excited about it, myself included.
Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, I'm the worst person in the world for like wanting to just show people and be like, look at this cool thing. It is the coolest thing. And there are a lot of cool things. Yes, some amazing stuff. People are going to be very happy.
Yeah, it's funny how, because like I watch some of the individual channels for each army. It's funny how, like, and this is a good example for Kithgard. There's like not a lot of Kithgard art out. There's just a few models released, but there's a whole Kithgard channel, and people are just raving about the few models they have. And I'm like, this can only be fantastic for when the rest of the line gets like even just concept art.
I mean, again, obvious bias aside, best faction we've done. 100%. Kithgard range is phenomenal.
My buddy, who is he is a troll blood fanatic. He played Southern Creole since like they came out in original like hordes. He saw them and he was like, that's a troll faction. That's what I want.
Yeah. No. I'm there for it. We are brothers from another mother. They are phenomenal.
They are fantastic. Very excited for them. I think one of my favorite parts about them is like you've been doing the templating and they're all similar, but then the Kithguards seem to be like these like mercenaries picking up parts, and each one has like, that's like a piece of this gun, that's a piece of this gun. I love that individuality through the army too.
Oh yeah, and without getting into spoiler territory, the earlier conversation sort of talking about like a faction that able to reference and draw on the history of the Iron Kingdoms. Like when you see the Kithguard, like it's really, really like explicitly right there in your face. This is a faction that has a deep, deep ties to the history of the battlefields of the Iron Kingdoms. Won't say any more than that.
That is going to be sweet. Can't wait to see it. Now we can get into some of the more technical, nerdy questions.
Oh, this is my topic. This is my topic.
And this will tie into the Phantasm chat we had earlier. When designing a Colossal, how different is it for you versus designing a Warjack or a War Beast in that matter? Like, obviously there's the engineering aspect of it, but like when you're working with such a bigger canvas, how does that affect you?
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer would be to say it's the same, but you do more of it. Which is somewhat true, because you are trying to capture the same aesthetic in the big model as the smaller siblings. There should be an obvious design through line from a light Warjack all the way up to a Colossal, and with the Gargantuans there can be there's a bit more of a broad canvas because you're dealing with organics, but still they should feel coherent and all in the same faction. So you're trying to keep an established aesthetic so that everything feels like it's naturally part of the same setting and continuum. But at the same time, with the scale of these things and the fact that most players will have one, maybe two, they also need to be iconic. They need to capture the essence of the faction and also show something that you haven't seen before, which is a really interesting kind of design space to live in. And then on top of that, you have to sell the scale. By which I mean it can't look like we just took a normal sized Warbeast or Warjack and just slid the scale slider towards the right.
Yeah.
You've got to find ways to modify the proportions. You have to introduce elements that will establish scale. The classic is human skulls. Everyone has a very intuitive sense of roughly how big a skull is. So putting skulls on a design or on a base, or masonry and bricks, or helmets, or bits of other smaller Warjacks, anything that helps establish the scale helps sell the size. And then proportionally, like heads on humanoids. Again, this is a thing that humans sort of intuitively understand: is most people's heads are about the same size. In adulthood, most male heads are about the same size. Female heads are about the same size. So if you make a head smaller on a model, your mind instinctively sees the overall model as bigger. So there's all these little proportional tricks. There aren't they're not in the places you would imagine. Oh, well, let's keep all of the rivets the same size we do on a light warjack on a colossal. They look comically small, and then you see pictures of old ironclad warships from the previous century, and they've got rivet heads that are like 14 inches across, and you realise that okay, no, rivets scale up. Got it. Rivet scale up. Yeah. So we'll look for other places. So those are kind of the sort of core elements that you're thinking about. And like I say, with the gargantuans, like in some way, the design language is even more broad, or at least you've got more of a places you can go, because you can be really if you'll pardon the pun, you can be quite wild in sort of reinterpreting the themes that you see in the war beasts.
Yeah.
And again, without going into, I can't talk about it in detail, but the Old Umbre gargantuan is really interesting, because thematically you can look at it and you can see the DNA, the design visual DNA of both of the primeval and the feral in it. And at the same time, it's a completely new and quite unexpected direction to have gone in. So I think that that one's going to be really, really popular, and it really expresses that well. So those are sort of the main considerations, and then obviously you're thinking about all of the this is a scaled up sort of design challenge from dealing with the warjacks and the standard size war beasts. Is you're thinking about the variants and the different parts that you'll be able to swap in and out, and you've always got one mind on the pragmatic level of if that arm doesn't have a break at that point, we can't put a magnet there, we can't put a joint there. So you know, there's very minor but still important considerations, and that one is actually way more challenging on a gargantuan than a colossal, because colossals are all robots. They all every joint has a very discrete breakpoint, whereas continuous, unbroken musculature and skin is very difficult to sensitively. Yeah, so you'll see a lot of straps and ropes and chains and armor plates, and I'm the person that put garrote ropes around the Abyssal King's tentacles for exactly that reason. And it works, because it's thematically it's within the character of the model, and it doesn't stand out, but it hides a join that would otherwise be ugly.
Yeah, it doesn't take away from the benefit you're trying to add to the model.
Exactly, yeah. And once you know to think about it, obviously everywhere there's a join, I'm going to find a belt or a strap or something. It's well, yes, it's a model. There are certain things that we have to do, concessions to reality. So yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, talk about concessions to reality. One of the things that we are now having to think about, and this does have an impact on the design, is how you're going to transport the model, how it's going to take apart, because it is actually very easy to design something that looks phenomenal, and you sort of think about it and go, yeah, that all works, but there is nowhere where we can put a join. If you put a join where you want the join, there's physically not enough space for the magnet or the peg or what have you. So those large models that are going to have a lot of impact on the table and a lot of scrutiny, all of the design challenges and all of the logistical and production sort of considerations are all exponentially scaled up. At the same time, they're so much fun to design. They're so much fun to work with sculptors on. Again, I don't want to go into the detail, but the Kithgard one, oh my goodness.
Oh my, no, oh boy. So we could try to talk about one that we can talk about. Can you talk about the Phantasm at all?
Sure.
Like the process on that one, because we know what that one looks like.
We do, yeah. So let me think about the Phantasm. So the Phantasm is a very, very pure interpretation of its original concept art. The main considerations that I tackled in terms of changes to the concept art were mainly to do with just like creating a slightly more dynamic pose
Mhm.
and thinking about the practical considerations. Beyond that, the core concept, which uh, Andreas sent through from the design brief that had been put together, the core concept art was phenomenal. Um, and it's always interesting when you're dealing with a model that's meant to imply like flight or being raised off the ground. So there was a lot of work going to be needed around the base and so forth for that. And it was actually one that I got the concept art through, and me and Matt sort of discussed it, and we were super happy with it. And then I didn't brief it out immediately because it's such a an elegant and fluted design that I needed to really think about who I felt could do it justice and make sure that we got a really really fantastic sculpt. And yeah, the guy that did it, who has worked on a whole range of War Machine models, did a stunning job. Um, and then we had to make some very minor changes because of making the breakdown on the uh, like when we worked out the breakdown where we wanted to put the magnets. Because one of the things that, okay, this is like, it seems quite dull and pragmatic, but these are the things that will actually make your lives so much easier.
We
I
appreciate it.
we wanted the wings to be magnetically detachable,
We love
because
that.
they are like, yeah, they're likely to be the thing that are at most at risk when you transport it. So you can remove them and store them separately. And in a great example of exactly what I was saying earlier, first of all, I thought, "Oh, I'll just take each wing off separately." The design of the area the wings fit to was such that there was literally no space to put, like, once you put the two magnet channels in, they basically butted up against each other. And I was like,
Mm.
well, can we do it so it's a tunnel with it? And in the end, we just came up with an alternative that means that the wings and the block all sort of separate. And it's a much more robust solution. But those kind of sort of iterative challenges, that's why my desk is littered with
Test
still
models.
like half, yeah, exactly that. Because like these things matter. So yeah, so like logistically and pragmatically, that was a really fascinating one. From a design language perspective, we talked about the idea of doing something that's obviously thematically fits the faction, but gives you something you've not seen before. Like all of the individual elements of that model are very obviously designed around the dusk theme, like the armor plate shaping, the fluting, the runes carved into the armor, the placement of the power stones. All of the blade shaping is all design language and all shape language that is drawing from the existing range. But to then take all of that and mix it into this gigantic sort of angelic,
Biblically
like,
accurate angel.
yeah, exactly, yeah, this robo seraphim descending upon you. That's exactly what I mean when I said, like, you want to take the aesthetic and mix it into something that you've not seen before, that uses it in a completely original way and creates something that's iconic. So it's got all of that freshness, but it's also instantly identifiable as the faction that it's in. And I think that is a really good example of doing exactly that. The Abyssal King's another one. It's different to every other troll war beast, but it instantly fits the faction. Without a question of a doubt, that that's the faction that model belongs to.
Yeah, Kraken pirates very easily sells together.
Absolutely, yes. I need to paint one for myself again, and I'm having barnacle related like tremors, so
No,
it might be a while before
I
I
have the same
can.
problem because like the Orgoth Colossal I painted for that I entered into the P3 competition was not my
Mm,
own model. It was for my friend who's playing Orgoth, but it's like the best model I've ever painted. And I'm like, I don't want this to go to you. I'm like,
yeah,
I've even offered, I was like, "Can I buy your Orgoth from you?" And he's like, "No, they're really pretty." I was like, "Dang it. Well, it was worth a try."
I think that's called being hoisted by your own petard, isn't it?
Yeah, and then now I have the problem of like, how do I beat that? Because like, and I've had
Yeah.
the painting challenge of like a mental block with the dust because I'm like, I love these models. I love the idea I had in my head, but as I'm working through it, it's like a struggle bus to get through that color and like that finding what to do. For me personally, like that fluorescent yellow that I've been painting has been such a
Mm,
mental block to try and get through.
interesting.
'Cause it's such a bright it's not like Imperial Fist yellow, it's not like super punchy yellow, it is like an odd color to make as a primary color.
Interesting.
For me personally, now I'm sure there's
Yeah.
better painters like you who would look at that and be like, "Oh, just do this," and I'm like, "I'm that's"
Well, I mean, I don't know. I've never tried to. I'm really not very good at like big flat panels with nice crispy edges, which is 95% of what Dusk are made out of. So I'm pretty certain that were I to attempt to paint them, it would be a exercise in blood boiling frustration.
and yeah,
So
and that could be my
I
problem too,
admire
like
anyone that does. Yeah, I've always been much more like, one of the things that I love about Trolls is it's all like belts and fabric and boots and all the rest of it. Just
oh yeah, I painted
so I
Chum
kind of
as
have
a
to take
palette
the
cleanser.
yeah.
And that model was fantastic to paint. So fun. I just didn't I took it and I was like, this is gonna be a very easy model to paint. I'm not gonna put a lot of effort into it, but I am gonna make him look cool. And it was just like a true like palette cleanser of painting. He's a fantastic model.
Thank you. He's really good fun to work on. I think that he is a good example of one of the things that Matt and I are sort of striving for with as we get to make more and more miniatures for the game. Is this idea that you use detail in a very intentional way? We put like maybe 15 barnacles on Chum, not 45 or what have you. It's using the detail in a very focused
It was
way
32
to
barnacles, by the
break.
way.
Was it 32? Did I put as many as that on there? Good lord.
I'm pretty sure.
Well, yeah, I've seen worse.
That is true. I'm
I
not
there is a model. I won't say which, but there is a model that during the revision process I removed. I think it was 190
Oh my lord.
rivets. Um, so yeah, it's about because Matt's very big on, and I completely agree with him. Is making sure that wherever possible, the model isn't a chore to paint, and also what detail is there helps tell the story. That is a big focus on making sure that everything leans into the narrative and the visual identity of that model. And again, going back to that visual hierarchy, is the detail level appropriate for the model in the faction? So Chum being a character war beast and larger as well is deserving of a little bit more
Yeah,
detail
he
than
deserves all 32 barnacles.
it does. Whereas like Pygmy Troll number 3 standing over in the corner there
Yeah.
probably just gets a loincloth and a stick and told to get on with it.
I like that. I like that a lot because I that's a thing I've been learning as trying to learn how to paint armies is like it's okay to put a little less detail work into like my soulless guardians because they're like
Yeah.
that's okay. Like I can instead of putting 20 hours into each one, I could put 10 into each of them. They still look great, but then I can put 20 hours into like Hazaroth.
Yes. And that's about there's two things going on there. There's the does the is the model range respecting your time? Um, because time is the most precious thing you can give to anything. Because no one can lend it you and you can't get it back. And then the other thing is, I always like to think of it. It's a bit like if this was music and everything was constantly playing at the same speed and at the same volume, you wouldn't have music, you would have noise. You need areas of intensity and you need areas of rest. And that needs to be whether it's a single model, whether it's across the whole army, the areas of lower intensity detail bring more attention to the areas where you focused it, and that's important to the design and identity of a faction of your collection, and it also informs how you spend your time on the miniatures. So it's a really important consideration, and I'm not going to pretend that we're perfect and we've absolutely got this concept nailed, but I think it's a really important element that we are always thinking about and striving to feed into the miniature process.
No, that's cool to hear. It's definitely. I know some people have said some of the models are too detailed, but I think there is definitely what you have said is like there is a perfect balance. Like so, the simpler models have less than the character do.
Yeah, and I think that as time goes on, um, we will do more in that direction, because obviously there is at some point there's going to be a distinct and notable sort of like there's the models that were designed prior to us being involved with the game, and there's the models we're designing now. And whilst that should always feel overall that it should be coherent and it should be harmonious because they're all part of the same world and we're respecting the same background, inevitably there will be different philosophies that sort of get expressed through the miniatures that you end up with. And it'll be really interesting, in 20 plus more years' time when we're having another retrospective on War Machine. We can look back and see how things changed.
That's gonna be very. I can't wait. I'm excited to see how that because there's a ton of moving pieces with this whole process. I can't wait to see how they all kind of shift together and then meet as one.
Absolutely, and like, even we can't you can't also ignore the role that technology and methodology and materials play in it. Like, we're doing things with miniatures now that were literally impossible 10 years ago. Um, so that is one of the reasons that it's not always a fair comparison to look at a miniature now and a miniature that was sculpted from a game from 2010 or 2005, because there's things you can do now that literally couldn't have been producible back then. Material plays an important part in the whole process.
You have given us the perfect segue to our next question. I hope you know that.
I'm just, oh, yes, wow.
How when designing models, how does the choice between, in this case, like resin and 3D printing and hips affect your process?
This is another one, and again, uh, I will pre-apologize if this gets quite long, because this is a really interesting topic, because my job, my entire role sits at a sort of three-way um, boundary point between creativity, technology, and like the practicality of creating a product that has to be sold. And the sort of joining point of those three things is the space in which the design process operates. And that's one of the things that makes it such an interesting challenge. Like, if you've got to design things that are fit for purpose, and fit for purpose varies based on things like what you're going to make them out of. um, so if you're just looking at 3D printing and hips, the most easy way to understand these things is, each of them, and this was true of any material at all, but each of them offers some things that are unique advantages, some things that are unique limitations. So a really easy to see difference would be that miniatures made in hips plastic, generally speaking, you can have much thinner parts because the material strength is way more forgiving, way less brittle than it would be in almost any other material at all. So chains, pipes, ropes,
Mhm.
cloaks, sword blades, all of those kinds of things can be uniquely thin and uniquely dynamic within certain boundaries if you do it in hips. On the other hand, if you're doing it in 3D printing, you can do way more complex interactions between different shapes, and you can do way more like changes of direction in the in the like line of a piece of fabric or a flow of a banner or something, without having to break that up into lots and lots of pieces, because the strict limitation on hips to do with how the molds work and the drafting angles and how underhang can't exist. You don't need to worry about any of that in 3D resin. So each of those very basic examples obviously are going to inform how you tackle a model, even if the concept art is the same. What you do at the end of it is going to be very different. I would say that it's really helpful to know ahead of time whether or not a miniature is going to be done in hips or 3D resin. And if it is the case that you've made a miniature for one material and for whatever reason it's decided it needs to be in the other, so that could hypothetically happen. There's going to be a fairly extensive amount of revision work needed to basically retranslate the miniature to take best advantage of the material it's going to be made in. So in the case of going from hips to resin, you might thicken up some thin elements, but you can also do some more dynamic things. And going in the other direction, the converse is true. You'll be swapping out fabric for new, really thin, cool like details, and but also like being really rigorous about where you're putting underhangs and thinking ahead about like, if that arm's got to come off, we're going to need to put something here because that'll be a seam, and we'll put a strap in. So it's less about how those things inform the concept art and more to do with the process that follows. That said, the earlier in the process that you know what your destination material is, the better, because if you know right from the first conception of a miniature, there's no chance that this will be in resin, it's 100% going to be hips model. Then that's when you get into, I can have it standing on one foot with ribbons flying out and a sword and its hair's going sideways, because you can do crazy things in hips like that if in resin it would just, you'd break the model off at the ankle the moment you try to pick it up. So you can, at the very early art stage, because the concept art usually includes pose reference, you can at that stage where you're posing and composing a model, you can go, right, let's really go for it. We know this is a plastic miniature. Let's live in that world. Lean in. Add those little, you can add the flowing chains. You can have the little tassels. You can do all of the cool stuff that hips lets you do. And if you know that the model's going to be in resin, you go, right, okay, knowing that, where can we take that? And you can look at some really cool like stuff to do with the way you do the detailing, and you can be like, right, this pose would in hips be a real nightmare, and we'd have to break it up in some very awkward ways, but it's 3D printing. We don't need to worry about underhangs and drafting. We can really go for it, and we can do these really complex poses, and you can lean into, okay, maybe we need to make something a bit chunkier because we want the resilience in the resin. Fine, we'll make that part of the aesthetic and lean in on that side of things and really like uplift the model. It's that, like, I think I mentioned it earlier, the idea of intentionality. If you know about this material early on, all your decisions are intentional towards getting the best possible version of the model.
That is really cool. I like that.
Yeah, and I think that if we wanted to break down hips in a bit more detail, that process is so it's the experience of learning how to work in hips has been really, really interesting. And big shout out to our manufacturing partners who are phenomenal, and the engineer team that we get to work with have a huge amount of expertise. Whereas I'm someone that's just sat with a lot of plastic miniatures on sprues and sort of stared at them for a while and tried to reverse engineer what the decision making was. So in case people don't know, and for apologies for those that already understand all of this, the reason that hips, which is the plastic model on a sprue that you put together, like has been made popular by Games Workshop, the reason that hips is such a unique material compared to anything else is because the key difference is that the molds for a hips plastic, the molds will be made out of like a hard metal, like a tempered steel or a titanium, and the plastic is injected at very, very high pressure and very, very high temperatures and cures in the mold pretty much instantaneously. The result of all of that is you've got a rock hard or near enough rock hard material inside a mold with absolutely no give at all. So you can have zero underhangs, like even a tenth of a millimeter would mechanically lock the part inside the mold. So all of the reasons that your models come on a sprue and they're broken down into pieces and parts is the efforts made by the engineering team to find ways to mold the model so that from the angle, what we call the drafting angle, which is basically the relative angle between the angle of the piece on the sprue to the direct sort of up and down pressure of the two molds, that drafting angle has to be completely straight. There can't be any like thinning or underhangs or anything. So whenever you look at a sprue and you know that, if you imagine that towards the sort of the mold line that you scrape off, everything perpendicular to that mold line has to move in a straight line. There can't be any underhang at all. All of the parts on the thing will make sense to you because you'll be able to see how the part has been split and orientated to allow that to work. Now, that sounds like a fairly easy thing to grasp. Okay, I can't have any underhangs. The implications of it, like a lot of things that sound simple, are huge because you've got to deal with, well, if a rivet's at a 45-degree angle on a curved surface, when you draft it back because there's a little underhang behind it, you don't get a rivet, you get a rivet from the top, and then it's like a stretch, sort of pill-shaped column going into the model. And these are the sorts of things that are completely unavoidable. There's no way around it, short of making the miniature in hundreds of pieces. So a big part of what I have been learning is how we can make splits, how we can hide splits, and what amount of necessary drafting and modification to make things work in plastic is acceptable versus something that goes too far. And then beyond that, once you've sort of gone through that at least once, you then get into, well, the perfect split for this model is adding, we've got 3 parts too many fit on the sprue because you have a certain amount of space around them and things for like the frame and the flow of the plastic and stuff. So as soon as you get to another frame, another sprue in the box, that's another mold, and that's adding a huge amount of additional cost to the production process. So it does then become a case of, okay, we need to eliminate 3 or 4 parts to be able to condense this onto the number of sprues that the project allows, so that the end box doesn't cost $700. So you then go back and you start being really kind of specific down to like, well, if we rotate this hand and if we move this finger and we put that badge against that lapel instead of where it currently is, and you make these minor adjustments, and that brings everything down to fit on the sprue, and then you're looking at that sprue going, okay, we know that now all fits, but we also know that anything that lies on that seam line, that part line at the side, you can have thin bits sticking out that side there that will get captured perfectly in the molding. So then you start to look for, can we have a little bit of chain hanging off, or a little skull, or a little, I don't know, a little Signarin symbol. And you start to look for ways that you can now lean into that plastics process and start to develop elements that couldn't be achieved any other way because they'd be too fragile. And you start to look for ways you can use the engineering of that sprue in your favor. And over time, what happens is you start to plan that in at the art stage, or plan that in at the sculpt stage, because I will take the art and I'll do a paint over in Photoshop, and I will color code the concept art to sort of show how I imagine that we're going to do the plastic breakdown. And I'm not like, it's not 100% because I'm not an engineer expert, but I understand the process well enough, and I have a good enough dialogue with our engineering team that we get to a place where the sculptor has a pretty strong sense of, this arm's going to sit in the mold at this angle, therefore I can put cool little belt straps poking out of this part of the wrist guard, and they'll get molded as these nice little freestanding belts, because that's how they'll lie in the mold. So everything is kind of like vertically working towards how that plastic process is going to work and how that sprue is going to be laid out. And the more information that you have about that end stage, the earlier in the process you can anticipate it and build towards it. So learning to sort of speak plastic as a design language has been really, really interesting. And it's interesting for me because I've got a whole bunch of sprues on my desk at the moment that, again, I can't talk about in any detail. You can hear them, but you can't see them. And it's become a bit of a cliche, but every time we have a new set of plastics, I'm like running around showing my colleagues, going, "These are the best sprues we've ever made." It's because like this process, we get a better and better understanding
Yeah.
of how to leverage the maximum out of this process each time. And
I have two
we're
questions
fortunate
out of
enough.
this.
Yeah, sure.
One, is it hard for you to switch gears between like hips mind and resin, or plastic mind and resin mind? Like when you're switching between two different sculpts? Or is it easier for you to be
Um,
like mentally be like, oh, I know this is a hips model, I can do this, this, and this. Oh, it's not a plastic model, I have to change it to do this, this, and this.
I think both of those things, depending on where you asked me. If you'd asked me this question, a year ago, it was quite a change. Now it's much more the second one. I think it's almost it's like learning two
Languages.
different pieces of software or two languages. Yes, you start off having to remember, like consciously remember which one you're in and what you can and can't do, and then eventually, yeah, you can just make the switch. But I also, must stress that I still think that there's so much more that we can learn to do, and like I don't feel like we've even come close to the full potential of what we can do with this manufacturing process and this material. It's a really nerdy thing to get excited about, but like
Well, I'm
the
about to
the
blow your
cre-
mind, maybe. My second question
okay,
is, have you ever done
yeah,
Gundam models at all?
no, I have not,
So
and I have seen the sprue tech that they use is mind.
they have different grades of model, which is usually different scales or different levels of detail. And they have the perfect grade scale, which is the really big ones, and they have the real grade scale, which is like if you took a really big one and made it really small. In a lot of those, they have injection sprues that are two different materials and two different colors. And it's in a
Yeah,
single joint, so the hand literally moves as you cut it off the sprue.
it's just it's on another level. I mean, it's for a different purpose and a different audience, and I
100%.
get that. But the like mastery of chemical engineering that you have, because basically that means all of those plastics they're shooting that sprue multiple times, and all of those plastics have to have like variated melt points that don't interfere with each other, which is
Mhm.
just wild
It is
to me.
mind-boggling. I
Yeah,
have a f
amazing.
I didn't know if you'd ever seen them in person, like, because I had built one a little while ago for a friend, and I just or like or my first one that I had done, I cut out the hand, and I was like, "Oh, this is cool, it's 2 colors." And then my friend's like, "You should bend it." And I bended the individual ligaments of the fingers, and they kinda just, like, snapped a little bit, like, they broke loose
Yeah,
of their mold, and then it was, like, a perfectly articulated, no glue, like, skeletal hand of a robot. I was like, "What in the world?" I was freaking out because like, I thought of the engineering, like, how did they do this?
it's crazy. I mean, it's so cool.
Yeah, that whole engineering process has always fascinated me about Gunpla, which is like the name for the Gundam hobby. Um,
Mm,
totally off tangent here. This is just like I really like Gundams, and like the models and the sprue technology they have is fascinating to me because of how easy they make models to be like, oh, you don't need glue and you can just push fit.
yeah, I mean, everything that I've learned about the plastics engineering process just makes me more like in awe of them doing that, because this is not an easy process to sort of wrangle and get what you want out of. and to be operating at that level is phenomenal.
I'm gonna send you a list of kits and be like, you could pick one of
Oh
these.
yeah,
And I
please do.
think your sprue brain will break.
I am excited.
The last big question: if constraints of printing and um, plastic injection were not a constraint at all, like you had no constraints, you had unlimited everything, what would be like a faction or an army or a model that you would want to see come to the War Machine table?
This is
Very broad
just
question.
yeah, it's such a dangerous question to ask anyone involved in any kind of creative endeavor. Do you know the artist Dave McKean? He did all of the covers for the old Sandman books, amongst other things.
I will look him up
He
real
was
quick.
a very very distinct visual style. I once saw him give a talk, and someone asked him if he had the chance to go back and fix up any of his old work, would he do so? And he said, if I did that, I'd never make anything new again because I'd never be happy. It's like never give anyone creative a chance to blue sky without constraints. But I had to think about this because I think it's a really interesting question, and I think that you say without constraints, but I kind of think about the like I sort of mentioned earlier, the tools and the opportunities and the technology and everything that we have available to us to make models now compared to some time ago. And there are models that I would want to do for personal gratification, and there are models that I would want to do for reasons of like professional exploration, if you like. I would love to do Terminus in plastic, and you can probably add, I don't know, maybe someone like Harbinger into this, like models that have a really cool conceptual concept. Huge wings, they're floating off the ground,
Yeah.
like what have you. But the materials available at the time those miniatures were originally released for the early days of the game, those materials were just not up to the job of translating that into a physical model. You've still got miniatures that people have a massive amount of fondness for, but they're not the translation of the original concept that I think you could achieve now. And I my palms itch to get my hands on something like that and do the huge wings and have all of the like flesh hanging off them and the mechanical parts poking through. Like I can just picture what it would look like seeing the kind of stuff that like modern plastic dragons and similar kits have. I just think that'd be phenomenal. I've made it no secret. I keep asking and keep being told it's not going to happen anytime soon. But I would love to do. Do you know Mulg from the original Trollbloods? The Mulg, the Walking Mountain. He was like the biggest Trollblood war beast at the time. He
I've
had
heard the name spoken, but it's a little
yeah.
before my time.
So he was a 50 millimeter character war beast, and he's like one of the oldest of the trolls, and he's all gnarly, and he's got a massive tree root as a club, and his back's all like rune carved menhirs sticking out of his back. And again, like conceptually, that's the most amazing thing ever, and he was a great model, but like in the world where 80 millimeter super heavies exist, I'm like, give me
I
my
see.
80 millimeter like super Molg. I would, I would just have so much fun sculpting that model. But
Yeah,
like, I look back. Sorry, go.
I would say the 80 mil space opens up so much middle ground for y'all, for
Oh,
just between Colossus
yeah.
and Warjax, because like those cool ideas that just don't. There's too many cool ideas to be like, can't have 40 Colossals or whatever, but
No,
you can fill that gap now.
yeah. It's. I mean, Matt, obviously at Adepticon, standing there in his Deathjack t-shirt, like talking about super heavies, has made it no secret. Like, it's one of those. It's a really interesting design space for me, for what I do, because it's that broad canvas that we were talking about that you get from a colossal in many ways, but it doesn't have the same sort of impact. Like a proliferation of 120 mil colossal type models is game warping. You can't give every faction another colossal and expect it to not have an enormous impact in the game, which would have to, you'd have to be so conservative about how you did that sort of thing.
Yeah, Jamie's crying
An
about
80
having to make
millimeter,
that many rules.
well, yeah, and balance them,
Yeah.
whereas like an 80 millimeter, for whatever reason, like visually you get the same playground, but you don't get something that is necessarily going to have the same kind of impact, and that means that as a design space, it's way more fruitful because the intersection between really cool model and we can make them without them having the same sort of like game bending effect. That's a great space to be in. So yeah,
I think a
I
really good
love the
example
18.
of that is like the Necro Harvester.
Mm,
The Necrofact the Necro
yes,
Harvester is huge. Like table demanding eyes, you can put a lot of work into that model because it's so big.
yeah,
But impact on the table, it has its spot in the table and in the list. That is not like game changing, but it's still very good.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, first, first like inorganic first sort of warjack type model I ever made for the game was it was the Harvester.
I know
I had a lot of fun making that.
when we got ours, we were very excited about it because the thing looks awesome.
It was really that's one that was a really interesting design challenge because it's held up entirely by spindly tentacles, and figuring out again how to make
Yeah.
that work was all sorts of fun. But so yeah, I'd love to do more 80 mil models because and ask any miniature sculptor and they will want to push scale because they want to put more cool stuff and more detail and more character into the miniature they're working on. And so having something that is inherently big, that's great. But I did think as well, if I'm honest, like my answer to this question is, what army or faction would I create? And the answer is kind of like all of them, because one of the things that I think, and I alluded to, is I think that there are some of the like most iconic early factions and like foundational factions of the game didn't necessarily get the miniatures that they deserved because of that limitation of earlier sculpting methods and earlier materials. And ultimately, I would love a chance to get my hands on some of those, like and like reinterpret some of those classics, because I think that would be just like a really nice journey to go on as someone who, I was a fan of War Machine as a player and a painter a long time before I worked in any kind of like professional capacity as a sculptor or involved in game design. So I could point at multiple models across multiple factions and I'd be like, oh, that never got the time in the sun it deserved. I'd like to, I'd like to give that one an uplift.
I think you guys
So
have a
yeah, I
really
could.
good space for that right now because the new Mark IV armies are like recalling back to older armies in some regards. And
Yeah.
I obviously lore wise, I don't know who can come back and who not can't, but then you could do that space. You have mini crate, which lets you do models in different ways and different styles, and you have the my mini factory where you can do cool things and just be like, here's a cool model.
Oh, absolutely. Like one of the great things about the way things are set up at the moment, as there are so many valid routes to take those things. I mean, way back in at the start of this, we talked about the rule of cool, and that's one of those places where rule of cool stuff can really like have a practical impact on what we end up doing. Is we've got so many channels that we can put models into, and mini crate's a really good example where you can do something that's really interesting and really visually like distinct and exploring a new design space, and you don't have to worry at all about the impact it'll have on the game because the rules already exist and
Hmm.
they're already settled, and the game is already completely happy and fine functioning. I mean, that's a fantastic like design opportunity space. So yeah, I'm I have no doubt that I will get so many opportunities to work on so many cool things in the coming months and years that I'm not going to have anything to complain about on the front of oh, I didn't get to do my one cool thing.
Very cool. That's very exciting. Well, that wraps up all the questions we've had for the day. I appreciate you coming on, Russ. It has been a wonderful insight into the nerdy realm of designing the current design space, how it is for you as a artist, and how you work with others. Thank you for coming, man.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And I know everybody in the comments and everybody's going to be, is there any details you can give us about upcoming things? Is there any last minute things that you're allowed to speak of? If not, it is totally okay. I just know the comments are going to ask anyway.
I was given strict instructions before I came on, under pain of China, to not reveal anything that's already been revealed. I am not Matt Hart. I don't have that kind of power.
Look, I am just checking the boxes that they're going to get asked anyway. So thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you and your time, and it has been wonderful having you on and talking.
Thanks so much.